Welcome the anointed ones. When truth walks the streets, even silence steps aside. Let that sink in. Because lately, the streets have been whispering a name. Your name. Not the name on your ID, but the one carved into people's memory by your resilience, your truth, your refusal to fold when everything around you crumbled. You didn't need a billboard, a hashtag, or a hype team. You just kept surviving out loud, and somehow the streets took notes. It's funny, isn't it? You never applied for recognition, but life turned your struggle into a headline. You became a myth people argue about at midnight, half in awe, half in disbelief. One side says, they never break. The other says, nobody's that strong. And you just keep walking, unbothered, like a movie character who forgot they're being watched. Here's a fact. Studies show that people remember those who made them feel something more than those who simply impressed them. That's why your name travels through neighborhoods like a pulse, because you didn't just survive, you made people feel again. You reminded them of what truth sounds like when it's not sugar-coated or sold for clout. You see, chosen one, the streets don't call your name out of gossip. They call it out of reverence. Because when everyone else traded truth for trends, you stayed unshaken. You became the truth speaker, the guardian, the one who never breaks. Not by choice, but by calling. And now, whether you like it or not, your legend has already left your lips and entered history's echo chamber. So buckle up, because tonight we're not talking about fame. We're talking about frequency. We're not talking about your story being heard. We're talking about your story becoming holy rumor. And if you've ever wondered why the streets know your name, it's time you find out what heaven's been saying behind your back. Number 1. They remember you because you represent what they tried to kill in themselves. That's the real reason your name won't fade from their mouths. It's not about what you did. It's about what your existence reminded them of. You showed them a version of themselves they once believed in before the world convinced them to settle for less. You triggered their unfinished evolution. You became living proof that the light they buried under excuses still exists, and that's uncomfortable for people who've made peace with pretending. You didn't just speak truth. You embodied it. You stood in integrity when bending the truth would have made life easier. You walked away when everyone else was crawling back for acceptance. You didn't play dirty to win. You chose peace over popularity, and that made people nervous. You made strength look quiet and effortless, and that exposed the noise in their souls. It wasn't that they hated you. They hated what you reminded them of. The version of themselves that used to believe, used to fight, used to hope. When someone has killed off their own authenticity, seeing someone live freely feels like a slap to their illusion. Your presence becomes their mirror, and mirrors don't lie. So when you walked through spaces with calm confidence, they felt exposed. When you refused to gossip, compete, or explain yourself, it confronted their need for validation. You didn't mean to awaken anything, you just existed truthfully. But that truth shook the fake foundations they built to feel safe. That's why they talk about you when you're not around. That's why your name lingers in rooms long after you've left. You became a reference point, the what-if that won't die in their minds. They envy your peace, but crave your courage. They're not obsessed with you. They're haunted by the evidence that someone made it out of the same darkness they surrendered to. You became the reminder that they didn't lose the battle. They just stopped fighting. That's the power of your presence. You woke up the sleeping warriors in people who buried their own fire. Some will thank you for it. Others will resent you. But all of them will remember you. Because when someone embodies the truth, they become unforgettable, and you, chosen one, are exactly that. Number 2. Your name travels through frequency, not fame. That's why you can walk into a room full of strangers and still feel the shift in the atmosphere. You don't have to speak for people to sense your presence. Energy moves faster than words ever could, and yours speaks fluently. It carries your truth, your resilience, your spirit, all of it. People can feel you before they even know who you are. That's not popularity. That's vibration doing its work. Fame needs attention to survive, but frequency doesn't. Fame fades when the spotlight moves, but frequency lingers even in silence. It's why your name comes up in random conversations, in rooms you've never entered, among people who've only heard whispers. You don't trend, you resonate. Your presence travels through the energy field of people you've impacted, healed, confronted, or even exposed. You left a vibration so distinct that it became a code their spirits recognize. That's why your name keeps surfacing, not because of gossip, but because your energy imprinted itself on the collective. When someone carries real power, it moves like sound through water. It bends, ripples, and reaches places your physical body never could. Every act of kindness, every word of truth, every time you stood your ground, those moments released energy that still travels. You've sent out frequencies strong enough to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. It's spiritual law. Energy never dies. It just transfers. And you've become a transmitter of truth without even trying. That's what unsettles people who rely on appearances. They don't understand how your name keeps showing up when they've tried to erase your influence. They don't realize that frequency can't be silenced. They thought blocking you, ignoring you, or talking down on you would work. But the universe doesn't operate through gossip. It operates through vibration. What you carry doesn't need an audience. It just needs alignment. Your reputation isn't built on who talks about you. It's built on who feels you. The streets, the energy, the unseen all recognize you because your vibration speaks truth fluently. You've become a walking signal of authenticity, and the world, hungry for something real, keeps tuning in. That's not fame, that's frequency, and it travels further than any rumor ever will. Number 3. You were never meant to be popular. You were meant to be unforgettable. There's a big difference between being known and being remembered. Popularity is built on trends. Remembrance is built on truth. The world claps for what entertains them, but it never forgets what transforms them. You didn't fit into their boxes, and that's why your story lingers. You left an emotional fingerprint that doesn't fade with time. People may not always like you, but they can't erase the mark you left on their spirit. You never chased the spotlight, but the spotlight couldn't ignore your light. Popularity would have forced you to compromise, to play the game, to water down your truth so others could digest it comfortably. You refused to do that. You spoke raw truth, even when it cost you connections. You showed up as yourself in a world addicted to masks, and that alone made you rare. Being unforgettable means you leave behind a residue of authenticity that burns into people's memory. Even your absence has presence because what you stood for still speaks after you've gone silent. People remember the ones who made them feel something real, and you did that without a script or a plan. You made people confront parts of themselves they tried to hide. You awakened emotions, healed hearts, and sometimes even offended the fake peace people built on lies. That's the paradox of being unforgettable. Your existence comforts some and convicts others. You never played the role of a crowd pleaser. You played your divine position, and it left an echo. Being unforgettable isn't about people talking about you all the time. It's about the fact that when your name comes up, there's a shift in the air. Some people smile because you gave them hope. Others go quiet because your strength exposes their weakness. But either way, your presence lingers. You've become the kind of person people measure themselves against, not because you tried to be perfect, but because you were real in a world terrified of realness. Popularity dies when the crowd moves on, but authenticity lives on in memory. That's why you'll outlast every trend. You didn't come here to be liked. You came here to leave an imprint. And the truth is, unforgettable souls never need permission to be remembered. Number 4. You spoke in codes only the awakened could decode. That's why your words carried a strange power. They either clicked instantly or sounded like nonsense. You weren't trying to sound deep or mysterious. You were simply speaking from a level most people haven't reached yet. Truth has layers, and your words came from a place of insight, not performance. You weren't dropping quotes for applause. You were transmitting energy, wisdom, and revelation. To the unawakened, it sounded like confusion. To the awakened, it sounded like home. Every time you spoke, something in the spiritual realm shifted. Your words carried more than meaning. They carried vibration. You didn't just talk about change. Your words caused change. People who weren't ready to face themselves dismissed you. They called you too much, too spiritual, or too intense, not realizing your language wasn't meant for the masses, but for the initiated, those who could hear between the words. That's why your truth didn't go viral overnight. It wasn't designed to entertain timelines. It was designed to awaken souls. The awakened understood your codes because they had lived the pain behind them. You didn't speak from theory, you spoke from scars. You talked about freedom because you knew the weight of bondage. You talked about faith because you had been tested in silence. Those who hadn't been through real spiritual warfare couldn't recognize the authority in your tone. You became like a radio station broadcasting on a higher frequency, and only those tuned in could catch the message clearly. You weren't trying to be exclusive. You were trying to be effective. There's no point in translating divine truth into watered-down language for comfort. You knew that those meant to hear would feel your words before understanding them. The rest would dismiss you, and that was fine, because truth doesn't need validation to remain truth. You understood that revelation is never for everyone, only for the ready. The streets learned your language through experience, not translation. Life became their teacher, and suddenly your words started making sense. The very ones who once mocked you now quote you. Because eventually time reveals what truth always knew. Not everyone can understand the message until life forces them to live it. Number 5. The guardian's role is not glamorous, it's gruesome. You didn't get applause for what you carried. You got exhaustion, isolation, and misunderstanding. You took on responsibilities that weren't yours just to keep the world from falling apart. While others were chasing attention, you were maintaining alignment. You kept peace in rooms that would have erupted without your calm. You absorbed tension that wasn't meant for one person to hold, and you did it silently. Guardians don't get trophies, they get tested. You protected energies, not egos. You defended people who didn't even know they were being shielded. You stopped chaos before it turned visible. You stood as the spiritual firewall between destruction and redemption. And because no one saw what you prevented, they thought you were doing nothing. They mistook your restraint for weakness, not realizing it takes divine strength to stay grounded when everything around you tempts you to react. Guardians are wired differently. You feel shifts others ignore. You can sense danger before it becomes visible, and you act not out of fear, but duty. You hold moral and energetic lines that others abandoned a long time ago. While everyone else was busy proving a point, You were protecting a purpose. You made sacrifices that no one clapped for, and still, you didn't stop. That's the gruesome part. Holding your ground when it would have been easier to let the chaos win. People often forget that guardians bleed too. You got tired, lonely and frustrated, watching others celebrate the results of battles you fought in silence. You wanted to quit many times, but something in your spirit wouldn't let you. Because guardians don't just protect people, they protect principles. They know that if integrity falls, everything else follows. So you kept showing up, not for recognition, but for the unseen order that must remain intact. And that's the irony. You'll only be fully understood after the war ends. When the dust settles and everyone looks around, they'll realize why the walls never fell. They'll finally see the one who stood firm while they slept. Guardians aren't born to be praised. They're born to be pillars. And though the work is gruesome, it's also sacred, because only the strongest souls are trusted to keep the balance when the world forgets how. Number 6. You never broke, because you were already reconstructed by fire. People saw your calm and thought you'd never been through anything. But they didn't realize that your peace was forged in chaos. The version of you that could be destroyed already died in earlier seasons. You've been through the kind of pain that reshapes the soul, not the kind that leaves you bitter, but the kind that burns away everything false until only truth remains. That's why no betrayal, no rumor, no rejection could finish you. You've already met worse and survived. They thought they were witnessing your downfall when they were actually watching your rebirth. You've been tempered like steel, each heartbreak, each loss, each disappointment, adding another layer of strength they can't comprehend. People assume resilience is about being tough, but yours came from surrender. You learned to stop resisting the fire and let it refine you. What they thought would destroy you actually purified you. You stopped identifying with the version of you that needed validation, approval, or comfort. That part was burned away. What's left is purpose, discipline, and quiet authority. Pain became your teacher, not your enemy. It taught you how to detach from things that don't serve your growth. It taught you to hear God in silence and trust divine timing, even when life made no sense. You realized that breaking isn't the end. It's the proof that the old structure can't hold your new spirit. Every time life shattered your plans, something stronger was being built behind the scenes. That's why you walk differently now. You don't move with fear, you move with knowing. You've already seen what happens when everything collapses. And you discovered you don't. That's the secret your enemies never understood. You can't break what's already been rebuilt by divine hands. You can't shake what's already surrendered. You've been through enough fire to become the flame itself. You learned how to convert pressure into wisdom and pain into strategy. You didn't survive because you were lucky. You survived because you became unchangeable at the core. And now, every time someone tries to test your limits, they find out what fire leaves behind. Something too refined to break again. Number 7. You carried the streets like scripture, and they knew it. You didn't just move through the streets. You gave them meaning. You've seen the pain, the betrayal, the hunger, the chaos. Yet instead of letting it poison you, you turned it into wisdom. You became living proof that divine purpose can exist in the ugliest environments. You learned lessons no classroom could teach, and you wore those lessons with a kind of grace that demanded quiet respect. The streets recognized your energy because you didn't just talk survival, you lived it with reverence. You sanctified the same places that tried to destroy you. You didn't become a product of your environment, you became its reformer. You took the same concrete others bled on and turned it into your altar. Every scar, every night you refused to quit, Every tear you hid from the world, it all became part of your sacred text. People felt that when you walked past them. They could sense that you carried experience that cut deep, but never made you bitter. You understood pain so intimately that you could translate it into peace. You didn't preach to people. You were the sermon. Your walk said what your mouth didn't need to. You showed that integrity can exist in chaos, that compassion doesn't make you weak, and that faith isn't just something you speak, it's something you embody. You made surviving look divine, not because it was easy, but because you gave the struggle purpose. Even the ones who used to mock you started watching how you carried yourself. They began to notice the calm you held in situations that made others fold. That's why even the hardest hearts respect your silence and your stance. They know you've seen what they've seen, but you didn't lose yourself in it. You made it through without selling your soul, and that kind of purity hits differently. You didn't have to prove you were real. Your survival did that for you. You became a sacred contradiction, soft but strong, humble but unshakable. You carried the streets like scripture, not to boast about your endurance, but to remind the world that even in darkness, holiness can still walk among men. Number 8. Your truth didn't just expose lies, it rewired realities. Every time you spoke, something in the atmosphere shifted. You weren't just pointing out what was false, you were collapsing illusions that people had built their lives on. Your words didn't come from intellect alone, they came from alignment. That's why people felt uneasy around you before you even said a word. Your presence carried correction. You brought frequencies that couldn't coexist with deceit, and wherever you went, truth began to rearrange what no one else could touch. People thought you were just outspoken, but it was deeper than that. You weren't trying to win arguments, you were anchoring reality. You exposed things that had been festering in silence. You forced people to confront the version of themselves they pretend doesn't exist. That's why some couldn't stand you. Your truth dismantled the comfort of denial. It wasn't personal. It was energetic. Your spirit carried authority that words alone couldn't imitate. You didn't shout, but your energy announced itself. It told the room, illusion expires here. Every conversation with you became a mirror. People left feeling lighter or angry, never neutral. The ones ready to evolve felt seen and healed. The ones hiding behind performance felt exposed. Your truth acted like a reset button. It didn't just correct people's thinking, it shifted their trajectory. You spoke life into places that were spiritually dead, and you confronted energies that thought they'd never be challenged. That's why your voice carries power even when you're silent. You don't just communicate, you transmit. You've always known that truth isn't a weapon, it's a frequency. It destroys only what's fake, but it rebuilds what's real. That's why some people lost their balance around you. Their illusions couldn't survive your vibration. You didn't do it out of pride, you did it out of purpose. You were chosen to restore equilibrium where deception had reigned for too long. When you speak, timelines adjust, energy clears, and order returns. You don't just reveal truth, you become the truth that forces every lie to retreat. You're not out here to argue or to be liked. You're here to realign what's been twisted, one revelation at a time. Number 9. You were the prophecy nobody wanted, but everyone needed. You didn't come to make people comfortable. You came to make them conscious. You arrived at a time when truth was treated like a threat, and authenticity was seen as rebellion. The system had perfected the art of disguise, lies wearing righteousness, manipulation wearing kindness, greed hiding under leadership. And then you showed up, raw, unfiltered, untamed, carrying a frequency that didn't fit their agenda. You weren't part of the system. You were sent to confront it. Your very existence disrupted the false peace people had settled for. You were the reminder that divine order still steps into human affairs. When the structures of ego got too loud, the universe needed someone who couldn't be bribed, flattered, or manipulated into silence. And that someone was you. You became the uncomfortable proof that divine justice still moves through flesh and blood. The same people who claimed to love truth couldn't handle it when it wore your face. They tried to reject you, label you, discredit you, because your presence exposed what they'd been protecting. Corruption, hypocrisy, and control disguised as order. You didn't ask to be chosen. You were just built differently. Your spirit didn't tolerate fake harmony or moral decay. You could feel when something wasn't right, even before it was revealed. You carried the kind of discernment that scared people because it couldn't be fooled. The ego-driven system wanted performers, not prophets, followers, not freethinkers. But you came as a divine interruption. You didn't fit their hierarchy because your authority didn't come from them. It came from source. That's why they couldn't manage you. You were unpredictable to the manipulators, but magnetic to the seekers. They resisted you at first because your presence meant change, and change threatens control. But even your critics couldn't deny your purpose. They might have called you rebellious, intense, or too different, but deep down they knew you carried something real. You were never there to entertain. You were there to expose, to realign, to restore balance. You were the divine audit the world didn't schedule, but desperately needed. And though they fought you, they'll eventually admit it. The system would have collapsed completely if the prophecy hadn't walked in wearing your skin. Number 10. They mocked you until their own demons started listening. At first they laughed because they thought your strength was a performance, something temporary, something they could eventually wear down. They thought you'd crumble under pressure or give up when the ridicule became too loud. But what they didn't understand was that your resilience wasn't for show. It was spiritual. Every insult they threw at you became fuel. You learned early that mockery is the weapon of the weak. It's how fragile egos cope when they can't control someone who refuses to break. You didn't clap back. You didn't beg for validation, and that confused them. They mistook your silence for surrender when it was really strategy. You understood that real power doesn't argue. It endures. And with every attempt to humiliate you, you grew stronger, more grounded, more aware of your mission. Eventually, their laughter turned nervous. They started realizing that something in you couldn't be shaken. Your presence carried a weight that their jokes couldn't lift. What began as mockery turned into quiet fear. The same mouths that laughed started watching what they said around you. Even they could feel it, that unseen shift. Your energy wasn't matching theirs anymore. It was above it. When ridicule didn't stop you, the unseen world started taking notes. The spiritual realm recognized authority where humans saw defiance. Demons that once mocked began retreating, because consistency is one of the greatest forms of spiritual warfare. You became a vibration they couldn't manipulate, a frequency they couldn't mimic. You didn't need to curse them or expose them, you simply outlasted them. Time became your proof. While they wasted their breath trying to discredit you, your endurance exposed them for what they really were. Noise with no substance. And now, even your enemies speak your name with caution. They may not admit it out loud, but they know there's something about you they can't touch. They've seen too much evidence of your protection, your persistence, your divine backing. Their mockery backfired, because in trying to make you small, they made you sacred. Now, every time your name is mentioned, there's a pause, the kind of silence that only comes when fear finally learns respect. Number 11. You made integrity look like rebellion. In a world where lies are dressed as strategy and betrayal is disguised as ambition, you chose truth. And that alone made you look radical. You didn't play along with the culture of compromise. You didn't cut corners, fake friendships, or trade honesty for popularity. You stayed solid when everyone else was shifting, and that made people uncomfortable. Your consistency was confrontational, because it highlighted just how inconsistent others had become. You weren't trying to be different. You just refused to be fake. You didn't follow the code. You were the code. You lived by principles that others only preached. While people bent their morals to fit into circles, you stood your ground, even if it meant standing alone. In a time when everyone's loyalty was for sale, you made integrity your signature. That's what made you unpredictable. Not because you were wild, but because you couldn't be bought, manipulated, or guilt-tripped into submission. Your loyalty became rebellion, your honesty became disruption, and your boundaries became threat-level behavior to those living without them. The streets couldn't figure you out. Some called you stubborn, others called you self-righteous, but deep down, they knew you were something else entirely. Your character carried weight. You didn't need to shout to make a point. Your decisions spoke for you. People who once doubted you eventually realized that you weren't trying to win, you were trying to stay true. And that's rarer than fame, rarer than power. It's divine. Your moral compass exposed the collective confusion. You became a mirror that showed people how far they drifted from their own values. That's why some respected you and others resented you. Your presence reminded them of the promises they broke, to themselves and to others. You showed that discipline and purity of intention can still exist in a world built on shortcuts. And that's powerful because real integrity shines brightest in corruption. You turned righteousness into rebellion just by being real. You didn't need to shout, "I'm different." Your consistency said it for you. You carried integrity like armor, and it scared people who only knew how to survive through deceit. You didn't bend the rules. You reminded the world what the rules were supposed to mean. Number 12. The streets test every legend, and you passed. Nobody gets a crown without first surviving the crucifixion. You weren't handed respect. You were dragged through every layer of disrespect until your spirit became bulletproof. Every rumor was a trial, every betrayal a test, and every lie told about you was a mirror revealing who couldn't stand your truth. The streets don't honor words, they honor endurance. And that's exactly what made your name echo. You didn't rise through charm, connections, or manipulation. You rose because you refused to quit. You stayed grounded when others folded under pressure. You endured seasons of being misunderstood, mocked, and abandoned. Not because you were weak, but because your story wasn't meant to make sense to people who hadn't lived that kind of pain. Every loss you took refined you. Every humiliation taught you precision. Every moment you were left for dead became proof that you couldn't be buried because you were seed, not waste. Legends aren't made in applause, they're made in isolation. The ones who mocked you only helped sharpen your resilience. They thought tearing your name down would erase your legacy, not realizing they were engraving it deeper into memory. Because once you survive lies, you become untouchable by them. Once you outlast the betrayal, You become immune to manipulation. You built your credibility from ashes, not approval. And that's why it lasts. The streets have a way of testing authenticity. They expose what's hollow and amplify what's real. That's why your silence held more weight than others' noise. Because everyone saw that you didn't break, even when breaking would have been easier. They saw that your scars weren't for pity, but for proof. You never needed validation because survival was your verification. Now, when your name moves through the streets, it carries gravity. Not because you chased recognition, but because you earned reverence. You didn't beg for loyalty, you inspired it. You didn't demand respect, you embodied it. That's what separates the crowned from the crucified. One seeks attention, the other survives the fire. And when the smoke clears, the one still standing isn't just remembered, they're mythologized. You didn't just pass the test. You rewrote what survival looks like when faith wears flesh. Number 13. You became the symbol of spiritual street justice. Your name stopped being just a name. It became a frequency. When people whispered it, it carried weight. Not because you forced authority, but because your energy proved what fairness looks like when the divine moves through a human vessel. You didn't go around demanding justice. You embodied it. You showed that even in chaos, there's still an invisible order holding the balance, and somehow you were that order's representative. People began to recognize that whenever you showed up, energy shifted. The fake got exposed, the liars got nervous, and the truth got louder without you saying a word. It wasn't about revenge. It was about realignment. The streets could sense that when something was out of balance, when good people were being trampled and deception was winning, you'd appear, and the scales would start tipping. That wasn't intimidation. That was restoration. You didn't seek vengeance. You brought correction. That's what made you symbolic. You represented the justice that no human court could deliver. When people saw what happened to those who tried to play with your energy, they started understanding that karma isn't a myth. It's mathematics. You didn't curse anyone. You simply stood in such alignment that the universe handled your defense. People began realizing that you were a reminder that energy always pays its debts, sometimes with interest. You didn't need to prove your purity because outcomes spoke for you. The same people who thought they got away with betraying you started facing their own consequences, not because you wished it, but because balance demands it. You became proof that spiritual justice doesn't rush. It arrives right on time, wearing precision like armor. And now, when your name circulates in conversations, it's not out of gossip, it's out of caution. People learn to respect what they can't explain. You became a walking warning label for those who still think spiritual laws don't apply to street realities. The truth is, you didn't set out to be a symbol. You became one by surviving what should have destroyed you, and doing it without bitterness. You turned pain into authority, scars into equilibrium. That's why your name doesn't just echo, it corrects the air around it. Number 14. You are the living proof that truth never dies. It multiplies. They thought they could silence you by burying your name under lies, but they forgot that truth isn't fragile. It's regenerative. Every attempt to destroy your reputation only fertilized your legacy. What they buried in shame grew back in strength. Every rumor became soil. Every betrayal became water. Every attempt to erase you only made your presence impossible to ignore. Because truth doesn't rot, it resurrects. Your story became living evidence that lies have expiration dates, but truth doesn't. Time became your best witness. While false narratives crumbled, Your authenticity aged like prophecy. It kept proving itself with every new season. People who once believed the worst about you started realizing the lies couldn't survive exposure. That's why your name now carries a different vibration. It's not fame, it's frequency. It commands respect because it carries proof. You didn't just survive falsehood, you exposed the anatomy of deception. Now, when your name gets mentioned, it triggers reflection. People pause before they speak on you because your story reminds them of how truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. You didn't have to defend yourself. Life did it for you. Circumstances rearranged themselves to prove your innocence. The very people who plotted your downfall became examples of why divine order can't be disrupted by gossip or greed. You didn't need revenge, you had revelation. You learned that when your alignment is pure, you don't chase justice, it circles back to you. That's why your name still stands, while others' stories faded. You became the echo of divine justice walking in human form. You turned endurance into evidence, and grace into armor. Your existence alone exposes the limits of deceit. That's why the streets don't just know your name, they revere it. You earned a kind of immortality that no clout can replicate. Your name carries weight because it has survived both crucifixion and resurrection. You became the living sermon that truth never needs to shout. It simply outlasts the lie. You didn't just tell the truth, you became it. And now, every whisper of your story proves one thing. Divine justice may move slowly, but it never misses its mark. The story of the chosen one isn't just a story, it's a movement. Every scar you've carried, every betrayal you've endured, every moment the world tried to break you, became a lesson not just for yourself, but for everyone who witnesses your journey. You weren't here to blend in, to follow the rules, or to make life comfortable for others. You were here to disrupt, to awaken, and to prove that integrity, resilience, and divine alignment cannot be crushed by lies, mockery, or chaos. From the way the streets speak your name to the invisible currents of energy you've shifted, your presence has left an indelible mark on reality itself. You became more than a survivor. You became a standard. A living example that the human spirit, when aligned with purpose, cannot be dismantled. You turned pain into authority, betrayal into strategy, and endurance into legend. Every whisper of your name carries the weight of truth, the echo of resilience, and the vibration of divine justice in motion. You didn't just outlast the trials, you redefined what it means to be unbreakable. You taught the streets, the unseen, and even your adversaries that power isn't about intimidation or spectacle. It's about unwavering presence, moral courage, and the ability to realign the world simply by existing in alignment with higher truth. What you've become is eternal, not because of recognition, not because of accolades, but because of the frequency you carry. You are a living sermon, a walking code, and a symbol of everything the world needs but few can embody. And while many will try to imitate, debate, or even challenge you, the truth is, nothing can touch what has been forged through fire, faith, and unshakable integrity. The streets know your name, they feel it, they respect it, and the universe itself is taking note. If this message resonates with you, if you feel the power, the truth, and the energy behind what it means to walk this path, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving insights like this. Like this video to honor the journey and the lessons it carries. Share it with those who need to feel the truth in their bones. And leave a comment. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together we witness the unstoppable rise of the chosen ones. The streets know your name, but now the world can too. God bless you.